Hello, Navi. Thank you for joining us here at SPJIMR. It's our pleasure to host you today.
Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to our conversation. Okay. Let's start with a word I think that is sort of deep significance to both of us, which is purpose. Both of us believe organizations should certainly have a purpose that goes beyond mere profit. There has to be a higher calling. And the concept of purpose really applies to individuals as well. Otherwise, it's an empty life, probably not worth living at all. So my question to you is, what is your purpose? Why is it you do what you do? What drives you?
So my purpose actually has been to bridge East and West. I was born in Pondicherry in India, but I was born as a French citizen. I studied in France, and like you, I spent 20 years in the US. So I always had this hunch from the early stage of my life that I was born and came into this world to act as a bridge. We call it a knowledge broker between East and West. And that's what I've been doing for the past 20 years now, which is take the wisdom and innovations and ideas emerging from India and then bring them to the Western world. So I see my purpose being a kind of like a bee that is trying to cross-pollinate, best practices, around the world. And the greater vision behind that is that we combine the best of the East and the West to address global issues that we are facing, which are captured by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So if I can modestly contribute to building a better humanity by combining and leveraging the wisdom of the East and the science and technology of the West, then my mission will be accomplished.
Okay, so the mission is something that is never fully accomplished in our lifetimes. How do you feel you're doing vis-a-vis that particular mission? What's working well? What do you think are still gaps that you would want to address that would allow you to fulfill your purpose?
So I'm so glad you asked that question because I'm actually going through an existential crisis right now because
And it's not age-related, I
No,
hope, right?
it is not.
Right.
It's actually related to the geopolitical context.
Okay.
So what's happening right now is that the world is becoming more divided than we know. And you see what's happening with the rise of populism in Europe and also in North America, whether it's in US and soon in Canada. So my purpose is difficult to implement right now because it seems like every countries are turning inward. So it's harder now to try to build bridges, across cultures and across communities. But I'm an optimist by nature, so I'm going to persevere. And I also know that this idea of the world becoming more fragmented, we have seen that. Both of us are in our 50s. We have seen these cycles where the world tends to kind of diverge and then converge again. So I would say in the medium term, it's going to diverge for a while. Mm-hmm. But that wouldn't stop me to keep trying to build bridges across cultures.
Navi, if something were easy to do, everybody would do it, right?
Yes, correct.
So therefore, I think that's the way we should console ourselves. So, your book, your international bestseller on Jugaad innovation, you get the credit, rightly so, for popularizing something that, we in India just sort of took for granted.
That's right.
But I think you put some structure around Jugaad innovation. Now, how would you position the core concepts of Jugaad innovation versus phrases that are potentially used in the Western innovation literature, such as bricolage, which is a French word, or improvisation-based innovation?
Absolutely right. So Jugaad has also a lot of similarities with other notions like effectuation, with System D, we call it in France, or bricolage that Claude Lévi-Strauss wrote about. The difference is the following, right? So Jugaad is at the same time how you practice innovation by cleverly, improvising a solution. Think about it as the what. The how part is that you improvise a Jugaad solution using resources you already have. You, like a MacGyver, you kind of cleverly repurpose something. That is the how part, which is being resourceful. And then there's the why part where it gets tricky. Because often the criticism against Jugaad is that, it's about cutting corners. It's trying to kind of, find loopholes in laws. So if there is a smart Jugaad, there is the white Jugaad. So the smart Jugaad people, the smart Jugaadus, their answer to the question why is we are practicing Jugaad for selfish reason. right? Because I want to get better, and I don't care the impact of my innovation on the society. And then there is the why Jugaad that we saw, and it's important to emphasize, during COVID, where we saw, for example, in Italy, there was a doctor and designer who repurposed a scuba diving mask to turn into respirators for COVID patients. We saw 300 makers, entrepreneurs in India who got together and created a collective to produce 1 million facial masks in record time for COVID patients, and using the resources they could find. So this is a noble purpose for practicing Jugaad. That's the why. But being in India, I can't avoid by going to the next level, because we all say, with cements in the neck, right? The concept of why is important. But only in India, we ask a question more important than why, which is who, right? The person. And now I'm answering, more directly a question. What differentiates Jugaad from bricolage is the mindset. Jugaad is more a mindset than a method. And the mindset is that the capacity, the resilient capacity to see a problem and not as a problem, but actually as an opportunity. It's like being an alchemist who can transform the adversity into an opportunity. And that is going to be particularly important, and I'm addressing here young people who are facing what we call eco-anxiety. They are facing eco-anxiety because they look at the climate crisis as a problem. What if, and in Americans, they're actually damn good at that, right? So they are now saying that, well, for instance, carbon emissions, is seen as a bad thing. But there is a slew of startups now who are transforming carbon into useful products. Okay, this is called carbon capture and carbon utilization, and it's a $6 trillion market. Okay, so this is where the Jugaad mindset becomes interesting. Is that there is the Jugaad practice where you see in villages, people, kind of repurposing, cleverly, their whatever they have, to find some solutions, makeshift solutions, and that's one end of the spectrum. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is the Jugaad mindset that you can apply to use AI or come up with very smart solutions, like capturing carbon and using it, to make useful products. So that is how I see Jugaad being not only addressing the what question, but also the how, why, and more importantly, creating a new generation of wise innovators who are able to transform problems into opportunities.
So when you were describing the Jugaad mindset, it had me thinking also about the entrepreneurial mindset.
Yes.
Right, where you look at something as an opportunity and not necessarily a problem.
That's right.
Where you look at the resources on hand, which is what you mentioned, effectuation, that comes from entrepreneurship theory.
Yeah.
So what might then distinguish a Jugaad approach versus a Jugaad mindset versus what people refer to as an entrepreneurial mindset? Yeah,
it's actually, you might say that there is a lot of similarities between, being an entrepreneur and Jugaad. It's just the socio-cultural context matters. Because in India, it's the land where we have so many problems and so much lack of resources, and at the same time, great aspirations. So I think the Jugaad actually, thrives, in practice in a setting like India, where the constraints are huge, the resources are limited, and at the same time, the ambitions and aspirations, to improve one's lives is very high. And this is something that we used to associate with emerging markets like India. And what I am predicting, having lived in the US for the last 25 years and also in being a French citizen, is that this constrained environment is starting to emerge in the West. So that means that the socio-cultural setting is becoming favorable to the emergence of, so you can call it like Jugaad is like an entrepreneurial mindset on steroids.
That's what I was thinking. It seems like extreme entrepreneurship under duress, if you will, right?
Actually, that's why my TED Talk is actually titled, Creative Problem Solving in Extreme Limits.
Okay. Yeah. So first book, obviously, brilliant bestseller on Jugaad innovation. But, here you've come out with maybe a equally good, maybe an even better book, called The Frugal Economy. So what did you feel was the need for a second book? What did you feel was missing from your book on Jugaad innovation that motivated you, to put your next set of thoughts down in this particular book. So give us a little bit about the origin of the book, the inspiration behind it.
So remember that when we wrote the book Jugaad Innovation, it was 15 years ago. The idea of the bottom of the pyramid that C.K. Prahalad talked about was all about how can you bring basic goods and services to people who live on the margins. So we looked at examples like, consumer goods, it could be electricity, clean energy, it could be education. And how do you make, so the key words 15 years ago around Jugaad innovation was making products and services affordable, so affordability and accessibility. And 15 years later, I'm proud to say that, with things like digital payments and all the stuff, we achieved that goal. We achieved the goal of, making products and services as much as possible accessible, affordable, right? But then there's a third important word, which is sustainability. A great example of that would be, for example, delivering products in small sachet that Calvin Care did and then Hindustan Unilever did. It's great because it makes products accessible to people in villages, but then it creates a nightmare in terms of the plastic that used to make these sachets. So that's when we realized that we need to combine affordability, accessibility with sustainability. And that's where the notion of frugal innovation emerged, which is about how can you do things better with less. That means creating more economic and social value, but also the less applies to minimizing waste, right? And also emissions, carbon emissions, right? So that is what frugal innovation is about. And then this new book I published called Frugal Economy is looking at the Western world. For instance, to give you an idea, right? So 2/3 of Americans don't have $500 to deal with the medical emergency. 1/4 of the European population is facing poverty. And meanwhile, we keep hearing that, we need to reduce emissions. We need to, reduce waste as well. So you see that we are in a tricky situation because you still have to bring more dignity to people who don't have, the basic access to, healthcare, services, not only in the emerging markets, but even the richest countries now. At the same time, we are facing a dilemma because at the same time, you also have to pay attention to, how to reduce waste and, reduce emissions. So the frugal economy is trying to find clever ways to deliver, basic services and goods to people that can't afford, and do that in a way that is socially inclusive, but also ecologically sound.
Okay.
So that's the idea about, frugal innovation and frugal economy is that the initial purpose is still to bring dignity to people by giving them access to basic goods and services, but do so in a way that doesn't damage the planet, but actually even regenerates the planet.
So, you sort of talked about Jugaad, so a method or a mindset to do things with minimum resources. You also made a point about the why of Jugaad, which is, it could be a selfish purpose or a smart purpose, or it could be a wise purpose, looking at others. What it seems like you've done is added the next level, to the why and say, even if you were to use Jugaad and you're asking for the why, even though it may be for good, think though about the larger term implications and the larger term consequences of whatever this innovation is. Absolutely. From a sustainability point of view. And so I see how you have layered on overall from Jugaad to wise Jugaad to a frugal economy, which is wise Jugaad plus sustainability.
And that's where I'm proud to spend several months in India to promote frugal economy, because India can be a trailblazer. Right? We keep hearing that India can be a leapfrogger. We can leapfrog the West, by becoming Viksit Bharat and have, a $7 trillion economy by 2031, then a $30 trillion economy by 2047. But the West has done that. They built Viksit, America, they built Viksit France. Right. But now they're discovering that, oh my God, we have a lot of social inequalities. We have a highly damaged planet now. What can you do? And this is why I think that India can be the birthplace of kind of a wise middle path between those who advocate for degrowth, stop reducing growth. We cannot do that, that's immoral. We cannot do the Silicon Valley mantra, which is exponential growth.
Right. or move fast and break
move
things.
Fast, exactly.
Too many things to
we
break.
Cannot really, we are more like the elephant, right? We move slowly but gradually, steadily. So India, I think, has a historic opportunity to be the birthplace of, I call it the third way, which is a way of doing better with less. And again, because we are the land of Jugaad, we are the birthplace of frugal innovation. It's just that, as the Nobel Prize winning economist says, Edmund Phelps, that we need to have the kind of confidence that we can tap into our indigenous knowledge and wisdom to blaze a new trail that will inspire other nations.
So one of the challenges, Navi, that guys like us have, who have a point of view but are hoping that others absorb that point of view and implement it in practice, because the positions we hold, we can simply illuminate, if you will, at this point. Corporate leaders, looking at the ideas of Jugaad innovation, I think, felt that they could relate to it, right? They could relate to it because, they want to do more things with less resources, right? And it was very much aligned with sort of their way of thinking. Now, you're challenging these folks to think a little bit differently now, right? With frugal economy and frugal innovation, when you're talking about sort of the goodness, the long-term goodness of what this thing would be. And then the models that you propose, it's a fascinating book, with the 3 pillars that you propose. How do you feel corporate managers and leaders will react to it? Do we run the risk that they feel it is too idealistic, that you cannot possibly pursue profit and all these noble goals at the same time? That's what we would like them to.
Sure.
What has been your experience speaking with corporate leaders about their willingness to embrace the idea and to make changes within their organizational structures and strategies and systems to allow for a frugal economy to flourish?
It's a great question, and I'm actually dealing with the dilemma right now because the corporate response to this new book has been a bit timid. And in America, the country that I have to make a confession, 3 companies told me that this book is a bit too ahead of its times. And I was surprised because, America is a country that actually is always ahead of, the pioneering country, right? America, the land of opportunities and always being at the frontier economy. What is happening, and I'm answering you this way, is that yes, you can have a great vision for what the economy will look like in 10 years. But my forte, my strength has always been, and you see in this book as well, is to illustrate this vision, this new paradigm with 50, 60 examples. Because companies actually, or human beings, relate to case studies and examples that are very concrete. So my hope is that, you need to crawl and walk before you can run in this new economy. So I'm giving them a roadmap. So I think the important insight that I want to share now is that as the world gets very complex in the next 5 years, you cannot expect, like our generation enjoyed 15 years ago when we saw companies like Unilever taking a 10-year view with Paul Polman saying, we are going to become the most sustainable consumer good company, by 2020. You won't see that anymore. What you're going to see rather is, visionary leaders starting small with some pilot projects, implement it in one region first, a bold idea, and then scale it up, which is fine. So we also, as thought leaders, have to adapt our strategy and not aim for a big bang approach for transformation, but to deliver transformation in a bite size.
Okay.
And that's something, I'm a very impatient person actually, but I'm learning also with age become wiser and be faithful to my vision, but be very pragmatic in application and how I engage companies. And then find there are many kind of psychological techniques, right, where you can use a carrot or a stick to see how to nudge companies to move in the right direction. Even though they move in baby steps, that's fine. But as long as you handhold them and you take them gradually to the end goal, then I find satisfaction in being aligned with my purpose.
Okay, excellent. So we've used the word wisdom a fair bit during our conversation. At SPJIMR, we actually use that word perhaps even more than we have in our conversation here. We use it to describe a form of leadership. We have a Center for Wisdom and Leadership. We use it to describe a form of innovation. We use advancing wise innovation as kind of our rallying cry. And we have a center called Wise Tech that is out there trying to promote wise innovation amongst corporates and among entrepreneurs. Now, your principles of Jugaad and Frugal Economy, you do use, in fact, your first book itself, which was amazing, was From Smart to Wise, right? So it feels like, we are coming at it from at the same thing from different ways. But could you relate sort of your view of the work that you have done to this notion of wise innovation that we at SPJIMR talk about?
Sure. So I lived in Silicon Valley like you for 15 years. And I left Silicon Valley because I found that it's a place which is populated by smart innovators who develop technologies like the smartphone, which are accessible, affordable only for 10% of the world population. So I had a vision. I studied computer science. I'm a big believer in technology, but my view of technology has been that it must be inclusive and used as a powerful tool to empower people. And that's not possible if you're developing solutions in Silicon Valley, because Silicon Valley has a very elitist view of technology. So the idea of wise innovation is about, it goes back to what we discussed earlier, is that how do you develop innovations like technology innovations, like AI, for instance, that could be easy to use, more accessible, more affordable. And a great example of wise innovation in India is Digital Green, which is an online platform that allows farmers to share their agricultural best practices, or to, using WhatsApp, receive some advice from other farmers in the local languages on how to improve their productivity, for instance. This, for me, is a wise innovation, which is more inspiring than coming up with some crazy productivity-enhancing kind of tool that can be used only by 10% of the workforce, for instance. So secondly, I would say that going back to what we discussed earlier, the idea of wise innovation is not just about the what and the how, or even the why. It goes back again to the who, right?
We discussed that.
Right.
Yes.
So it's more about wise innovator that interests me. How do we get the young generation who's being trained at SPJIMR to become wise innovators? They need to have more self-awareness. They need to have a larger purpose. Fine, that's important. But in my book, we also talk about 6 principles that we gleaned from the Bhagavad Gita that tells us how to act, decide, and lead wisely. And this is why it's important that I touch upon the Bhagavad Gita, because in Bhagavad Gita, we talk about the 3 gunas, right? There is the kind of tamasic, guna, which is very much about being very conservative, very almost fearful about the future, and being very risk averse. And then you have the rajasic, which is very much like Elon Musk kind of style, like, go-getter, and no matter what the consequences, we will achieve our objective kind of thing. And that is the 2 extremes. And then there is the sattvic mode. And often in Indian context, sadly, sattvic is positioned as superior, to tamasic and rajasic as a kind of the 3rd guna. But actually it's not. What actually Bhagavad Gita says is that the sattvic leader actually has these 2 elements, rajas and tamas, but he knows how to balance them, how to integrate them, depending on the context.
So, one other word we used was paradox and paradox mindset, if you recall, in a previous chat. And I think that's the part that we've unfortunately forced managers to think about an either-or situation. Strategy is always positioned as making choices between A and B.
Yes.
But in reality, A and B are both possible, maybe not at the exact same time, but perhaps sequentially in some manner, right? So I think, what you're describing from the Bhagavad Gita is essentially sort of saying you need to have a paradox mindset to be able to deal with the tamasic and the, and the rajas.
And actually we have, I'm from Pondicherry, so we have a philosopher and yogi, right, Sri Aurobindo, who actually expounded the theory of integral yoga. So integral essentially means, the ability to integralize contradictions and opposites, right? And look at the whole. And that's also where I think India has the capacity to manage paradoxes better than any other country, because India, as Einstein says, the great intellect is the one that can hold 2 opposite ideas at the same time and still function properly, right? And Indians, we do that very well.
True. So we started our discussion with contemplating on purpose, and I'd sort of like to end the discussion with purpose, but this time not necessarily self-reflection, but your advice to others. What do you believe that in this day and age the purpose of a business school should be? And then what do you believe individual business school students should take on as individual purpose that is going to be meaningful to them and make them happy and yet contribute to the larger good over a 40, 50-year work career?
Sure. I think the next frontier for business schools is to think about no longer business schools. If you think about business schools, the realm that you think is the economic realm, right? It's a business school realm, economic realm. 4 years ago, when I received the recognition by Thinkers 50 as one of the top 50 management thinkers in the world, I still remember the co-founders of Thinkers 50 made an amazing prediction. This was, by the way, 2021, right? So COVID was still going on, and there was a time of introspection. And the prediction that they made is that the future business leaders will be focusing not only on the economy but on society. That means that, interestingly, Siemens, the German industrial firm, they had a strategy called business to society. So what they realized is that the purpose of business is not just to create economic value, not only for shareholders, but even employees or customers, right? But to think about how to impact positively the whole society. So I would say that the new kind of purpose of business schools tomorrow should think about how can we build a better society.
So from a bottom line to a triple bottom line.
Triple bottom line, absolutely. And I do believe that addressing societal challenges can also be profitable. And I think that's really where that paradox comes in, because for a long time we thought that, especially in America, right, with Milton Friedman, the idea is that, the business of business is business, right? And then everything to do with society is the role of government. And if I can be a bit controversial, I can say this, especially what I see coming up in Europe and with Donald Trump in the US, is that unfortunately the government is going to get smaller. So that means that the societal issue, somebody has to deal with it.
Right.
And this is why I see a historic opportunity for companies to go beyond corporate citizenship and actually become active kind of drivers of not only taking care of society, but transforming society.
So one of the things we've been trying to do here at SPJIMR is to build on the last sentence that you said, that just CSR by itself isn't enough. CSR is, at least in India, mandated as 2% of the profits. I mean, that's nothing, right? It's a drop in the ocean. And so what we try and do here is to really talk about responsibility and wisdom in the core innovation products and services that you do. The world has to get better with your core business, not because of this little extra charity that you do on the side. But then switching from what business schools should do, emphasizing the right kinds of outcomes and hopefully training people the right way to achieve those outcomes. That's great, but at the end of the day, it's individual agency and individual desire that drives what a person does. And you have a generation of young MBAs. I know for us everybody is young, but let's say those in their 20s, maybe even early 30s, that are looking at 30, 40 years ahead of them. And they listen to us and say, yeah, you guys can talk about paradox mindsets and so forth, but I may have to make some hard choices in my life. What would be your words to these folks that are maybe earlier in their careers that sort of understand what it is we're talking about, but may not be necessarily buying into the practicality of what we're talking about?
I'm a big believer that the notion, first of all, the studies show that the young people will not have a linear career path that we had. Okay, so their career path is going to be more like a zigzag. And I start with that because that's what I practice myself, right? So I did my computer science studies in France. Then I worked for non-profit organizations and government agencies in Southeast Asia. Then I came to US, I worked for the private sector. Then I went to Cambridge in the UK. I spent 3 years there. That's the academic sector. Then I became self-employed freelancer for the last 15 years. And so what I'm getting at is that maybe the advice I would give young people is that this purpose, right, it's staying, and that's one of the principles of the wise leadership is that you need to be staying aligned with your purpose. That's important, that alignment, the strong alignment, but you need to be flexible in how you operationalize the purpose. Okay, and if you are facing financial difficulties, it's perfectly fine, to go apply your core, MBA skills, as in accounting or management consulting. That's fine, but then you may do that for a couple of years, and then you realize that okay, now it's time for me to go do something else, which is more meaningful. So I think young people shouldn't feel compelled to constantly align what they do, in terms of work with their ideals. So it's okay to be a bit flexible in how you, apply these ideals in your day-to-day life. And I think that will make you more pragmatic. And wisdom, by the way, goes hand in hand with the notion of pragmatism. Actually, pragmatism is
practical wisdom, praxis.
Practical wisdom,
right?
practice, right? And pragmatism, for people who listen to us, is important. That is the school of philosophy that comes from America. There are many well-known thinkers in America who actually has been proponents of this notion of pragmatism.
John Dewey,
I was thinking, right?
Yeah.
And Cornel West actually has written a great book that you can read as well on the different kind of threads of this thought process of pragmatism. So that's what I recommend to young people is, be idealist, at the same time be pragmatic, and that is the quintessential definition of being a wise leader.
Okay. So with that then, Navi, thank you so much. I hope our conversation is of some value to somebody, somewhere.
I hope so.
But regardless of that, I had fun
Me too.
with the chat.
Yeah.
So thanks so much again.
Thank you so much for
taking the
having
time.
me. Thank you.
you.